Ryan Burns wanted what most smart, driven men in their early 20s want: a full-time job with a high salary doing something he loved, and a girl with whom to share the wealth.
After college, I was looking for something where I could have fun, help people, and make money, and meet somebody that, I was a good match with. I was not aggressively looking for a serious relationship, but I was open to dating and meeting new people.
So in the fall of 2007, the ambitious Utah native focused on achieving his first goal: earning a good income with a company that helped people gain access to attorneys and legal counsel.
I knew that there was people making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year with the company, so that's what intrigued me.
But by December of 2007, just a few months after he started as a sales associate, Ryan found himself struggling. So he decided to attend a local training meeting where one of the company's top executives named Travis was giving a motivational speech.
It was just amazing. Travis gave everything he had that night, and it definitely impacted me. I laughed, I cried, I could relate to him.
Moved by Travis's speech, Ryan worked up the courage to introduce himself, and was very glad he did.
Travis made me feel like $1 million. He gave me some advice. And I left out of that training that night in those 2 hours inspired.
Something that Travis said just clicked with him, and from that point on, he was just successful and doing really well in the company.
Ryan was well on the way to the career of his dreams, but his love life was still lacking. That is, until March of 2008, when he attended his company's annual convention in Oklahoma City and spotted a stunning woman in the crowd.
She was a beautiful blonde girl. She was walking everywhere smiling, and she just seemed like somebody I wanted to definitely go and talk to.
So Ryan was shocked when the attractive blonde made a beeline straight for him.
She stuck out her hand and says, "Hi, I'm Jody." And I shook her hand. I said, "Hi, I'm Ryan." And she was just very forward.
Jody told Ryan she worked in the company's California office and was moving up the ranks to a director position. Ryan was instantly impressed.
She was an attractive woman. We had the business in common, which was great. She just seemed like somebody I'd be interested in getting to know.
The two exchanged numbers, and Ryan hoped this might be an opportunity to achieve both of his goals, professionally and romantically.
I was excited to be able to get her number and know that I could give her a call.
And a few weeks later, Ryan finally mustered up the courage.
We hit it off right away. We had just so much in common about the business and where we wanted to go in life. I had felt like I'd met, the coolest girl on the planet.
Soon, Jody and Ryan were spending hours on the phone every night. But during one late-night chat, Jody revealed she had once dated Ryan's coworker, Travis.
I was surprised, but I didn't ask her much about Travis. She told me her and Travis broke up because of the trust. But he was a great guy.
Ryan didn't want to pry. Besides, he was truly enjoying his promising phone relationship with Jody. He only wished they lived closer.
She started kind of flirting with the idea of coming out and seeing me. So I was excited to spend some time with her and see if, we got along in, a personal one-on-one basis.
So on June 3rd, Jody planned to leave California around 9 p.m. and drive straight through the night to Ryan's house.
She was going to call when she was leaving California. I felt like it was a huge step for somebody to drive 1,000 miles to come and see me. So I was excited.
But when 11 p.m. came and went with no word from Jody, Ryan started to worry.
I called her, she didn't answer, sent her a text around 10 or 11. She didn't answer that. I called her again at 1 and still going straight voicemail. That's when I started really kind of being concerned.
Jody's radio silence made Ryan fear the worst. And he would soon find out his instincts were dead on.
No one could have imagined what Jody was really doing at that time.
She's just evil, all the way around.
I was sick to my stomach. She's a monster, a very manipulative monster.
On June 3, 2008, Ryan Burns was anxiously awaiting the arrival of his coworker and budding love interest, Jody. After 5 weeks of long-distance phone calls, she was finally driving from California to visit him in Salt Lake City, Utah. But when 24 hours passed without word from Jody, Ryan was beside himself.
I was concerned and I was sick to my stomach. Maybe she got cold feet. I don't know. Maybe she could be seriously hurt. There was definitely something wrong, and I didn't know what it could possibly be.
Finally, that evening, Jody called.
I was relieved. Because at least I knew she was alive. She told me that she got on the freeway in the middle of the night and it was dark and she drove the wrong direction.
Jody explained that her phone had died, and after finally getting back on course, she pulled over for a couple hours of sleep. But she promised to be there by morning. Finally, around 10 a.m. on June 5th, Jody and Ryan reunited in person.
I was just happy and excited. She got out of the car and came up and gave me a big hug and said she was so happy to see me.
But Ryan couldn't help noticing Jody's physical appearance.
First thing I noticed is her hair was not blonde. She had brunette hair. She was looking completely different. Then I noticed she had 2 little bandages on her hand. I said, "What happened to your hand? Are you okay?" And she basically said that she cut her hands on a margarita glass. She's kind of a klutz like that.
Ryan was excited for the chance to finally spend some alone time with Jody.
And we turned the movie on, and she just snuggled right up. She turned her head, and I leaned over, and I kissed her. It was just, a sweet kiss.
But before things got too heated, Jody announced it was time for her to leave. And the following day, Ryan already found himself missing her.
After she was here, I was more excited about the relationship. The very next conversation that we had, we discussed me going up there.
Ryan was on cloud 9, but when his coworkers saw him the next day, they seemed prepared to bring him back down to earth.
I didn't think Jody was a good match for Ryan. I knew that after she and Travis broke up, she had sent emails to girls that he was dating because she had broken into his email account.
And they had somewhat of a tumultuous relationship. They had trust issues. I was nervous about Ryan dating her, and I didn't think it was a great idea.
Ryan didn't listen to any of it. He was, I guess you'd say, love-struck at the time.
They didn't give me any details. They just said, take my word for it. But I'm enjoying getting to know her, and so it didn't deter me. I just wanted to hear her side.
So on June 9th, during a 3-hour internet chat with Jody, Ryan broached the subject of the trust issues that had ultimately ended her relationship with Travis.
That's when she explained to me. She started going through Travis's phone. She saw that he was actually texting a few different girls, and she said, I was devastated. I couldn't believe that somebody I thought I was in an exclusive relationship was dating other women.
Jody admitted she had broken into Travis's email account too. Clearly ashamed and horrified, she'd stooped to such a low level.
I was surprised, but at the same time, I kind of admired her honesty and the fact that she was open about it and trusted the relationship we had built at that time.
But the next day, Ryan received a call from Jody, and even he wasn't prepared for the shocking words coming out of her mouth.
She was crying. I asked her if she was okay, and she said, he's dead.
I was sick. You hardly can believe it's happening. It's surreal.
I was just so shocked. I thought, man, I might be talking to a killer.
On the morning of June 10th, 2008, Ryan Burns received a frantic phone call from his long-distance love interest, Jody.
She sounded upset. She was crying. She said, he's dead. Travis is dead. I was just shocked by the news. I couldn't figure out what could have gone wrong. I thought it had to be a suicide, but Jody told me that the police, they're looking at it like a suspicious death, and there was a lot of blood.
Ryan struggled to make sense of the news, all the while devastated that a man he looked up to, who was so full of life, was now dead.
I just don't understand how this could have happened. I felt bad for his family. I felt bad for Jody.
But Ryan's co-workers had different feelings and plenty of accusations. They made no attempt to hide their suspicions that Ryan's new love interest, Jody, was involved in Travis's untimely death.
I got a call from Clancy, and she said, "Did you hear the news?" And I said, "Yes." I talked to Jody, and Clancy immediately said, "Don't ever talk to that crazy bee again. Ryan, she killed him. I don't know how she did it, but I'm telling you right now, she did it."
Everyone that knew her and knew Travis suspected she killed him. I mean, I knew with every fiber in my being that it was her.
All of us knew down to our core that she was the one who had killed Travis, and Ryan didn't want to believe it.
I thought it was ridiculous that people would think that she could take Travis on, especially since the guy was athletic at 200 pounds, and Jody was 115 soaking wet. She was a tiny person.
And by all appearances, Jody was just as devastated as everyone else. She'd even assisted police.
Jody spoke to the detective, and she seemed to be cooperating in a normal way and wanted to help in any way she possibly could.
Still, when Jody mentioned 2 weeks later that she wanted to come back to Utah for a visit, Ryan felt torn.
I told her, "I would love for you to come to see me, but honestly, Jody, a lot of people here think you had something to do with Travis's murder, and it would be an extremely awkward time to come and visit me." And she acted shocked. You know, that was the first time she knew people were really suspicious of her.
Ryan quickly assured her once everything blew over, they'd be together. But it seemed things were about to blow up instead. On June 19th, police confirmed the date Travis was killed. A camera had been found inside Travis's home, hidden in a washing machine.
The sheets and a camera they found inside the washing machine had been bleached and had gone through a washing cycle. Police were able to go through it. There were photos that were still on the camera and some that someone had tried to delete. There were timestamps on the photos that showed him being murdered on June 4th, 2008.
When Ryan learned the date Travis was killed, all hopes of a future with Jody completely vanished.
That was mind-blowing information to me, because that means he did die the day that Jody was missing for 26 hours.
With a sick and twisted feeling in his stomach, Ryan's mind flashed back to their visit.
I started piling on the whole trail of inconsistencies, and that she had been missing for 26 hours and her phone was actually off, and the cuts on her hands and her hair being dyed. That's when I started to believe all the things that all my friends had been saying, that she probably had something to do with it. I knew that it was too big of a coincidence.
With only Travis on his mind, Ryan called the Mesa Police Department to tell them about his interactions with Jody.
I'm not going to try to condemn her. I'm not going to try to protect her. I'm just going to tell them exactly what happened and exactly what I knew.
Ryan hoped he had made the right decision. And soon, when the shocking details of Travis's death were made public, it became all too clear that he had.
It was a very grisly scene, a lot of blood.
The state that Travis was found in, it's horrific to think about what he went through.
And I just remember feeling sick to my stomach. It could only be conjured up in a horror movie.
If you have a story for Who the Bleep and would like to appear on the series, go to investigation.discovery.com. In July of 2008, Ryan Burns went to the police about his former love interest, Jody, who he suspected was involved in the murder of their co-worker, Travis Alexander.
The detective wanted to know about my relationship with her and her travel schedule on the 4th. So I told him how I was, couldn't get a hold of her. The fact that the detective was still asking questions about Jody, I knew that she was still definitely up there in the suspect list.
And as more details of the crime were uncovered, the entire nation was suddenly captivated. It turned out Travis hadn't just been murdered, he'd been completely brutalized.
Travis was found in the shower. He had been stabbed more than 20 times. He was shot in the head, and his throat was slit from ear to ear. This attack was horrific. It was a gruesome crime scene.
It was just unreal finding out how he was actually killed. I don't even know how to explain it. It was horrible.
Initially, Jody denied ever being at Travis's house on June 4th.
Were you at Travis's house on Wednesday?
Absolutely not. I was nowhere near Mesa.
Jody told police she was with Ryan Burns the entire time. She told investigators she drove to Utah on June 3rd, 2008 and stayed there until June 5th. Clearly, she was trying to use Ryan as an alibi.
But the photographs on the recovered camera proved otherwise.
There were photos of Jody and Travis being intimate. There were photos that Jody took of Travis while he was in the shower. From there, the crime started. You can see in the timestamp exactly when Jody started to kill Travis. You see Travis lying bloody on the floor. You see Jody's foot. You see a crime being committed before your eyes.
On the morning of July 15th, 2008, Jody Arias was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Travis Alexander.
I felt sick to my stomach. I couldn't believe that I held in my arms a murderer who had just done that to another human being.
And as Ryan tried to come to grips with the truth, Jody decided to change her story, telling investigators she did visit Travis on June 4th, but she didn't kill him.
She told police that two masked intruders had broken into Travis's home and committed the crime, and that she was narrowly able to escape.
But when the police disproved that story, Jody claimed she killed Travis in self-defense.
They said there was no way that this was a likely story. If you are going to kill someone in self-defense, you're not going to stab them more than 20 times and shoot them and slit their throat.
It appeared Jody Arias was nothing but a professional liar, a femme fatale, and was possibly planning to kill again.
They found her with a 9mm, 2 knives, and she was going somewhere. I don't know where she was going and who she was going for, but she was going somewhere.
I got chills thinking, could she have really had that in mind to actually kill again? Could it have been me?
Ryan was eager for Jody's trial to start, but getting justice for Travis wasn't going to be a quick or easy process. It took more than 4 years before Jody had her day in court on January 2nd, 2013.
Jody has seemed to lack emotion. Anytime she cried, to everybody, it felt like fake. It felt like a show for the jury. You'd think there'd be some emotion somewhere. She seemed so disconnected.
Finally, on May 8th, 2013, after 16 weeks of testimony, Jody Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder.
Find the defendant as to count 1, first-degree murder, guilty.
When I heard the conviction, I just felt a relief. She's not coming back into normal civilization ever again. I think it was premeditated. I think she knew what she was doing. I think if anybody deserves the death penalty, she deserves it.
Today, Ryan still credits Travis Alexander for inspiring him to pursue his dreams.
Travis completely influenced my life in a positive way. I want people to remember Travis as the genuine servant leader that he truly was.
Ryan's a lot like Travis, and he can move forward and just learn from the trials in his life and become a stronger person because of it.
Ryan has finally achieved the career success he always wanted, and he finally got the girl too.
I couldn't be happier right now with 2 beautiful children, beautiful wife. We have a great relationship. Life is going in a positive direction.
To the outside world, David Hummert lived the typical childhood of a New Cumberland, Pennsylvania boy.
I was the oldest of three. We did a lot of things as a family. We'd go to church every Sunday. And we did the normal family trips, and there were good, happy times.
It was all thanks to David's mother, Charlene, and her devotion to providing a good life for her children.
My mother definitely made sure that we experienced as much good stuff as kids as we could.
Char's kids were everything to her. Anytime you asked about the kids, she knew every little detail about their lives, and she always said it with a smile on her face, no matter what it was.
There was a few times where she got a second job to come up with money to make sure that the kids had actually more than we needed.
David's father, Brian, worked as an IT professional and adored his wife. The Hummerts seemed like an ideal family. But behind closed doors, it was a different story.
My first memory is actually being hit by my dad. That's the first thing I remember, probably when I was 5, 6 years old. Anytime anything upset him, he'd get a belt and smack you with it. He had a very short fuse.
Brian was always hovering near them, and he was very intimidating.
As David grew older, the physical abuse became more severe and more frequent. And one day in 2001, Brian hit a new low.
I believe I was 16 at the time. I normally would ride my bicycle home from school, but the chain had popped off, so my father had come to pick me up. We put the bike in the back, came home, and he was unloading the bike out of the back. The pedal caught the rear seat and put maybe a 1-inch rip in it. I went to go help him lift the bike out of it so it could get uncaught from the seat. He forced the bike back with pretty much as much force as he could, and the tire hit me in the face. Broke my nose, and I kind of thought it was an accident for a second, and then he started yelling and screaming at me that it was my fault that I trashed his interior and I was going to pay for it.
A bewildered David tried to stick up for himself, and for the first time, he fought back against his father.
I just jumped on him and pretty much pummeled him and choked him and threw him to the ground and beat on him for a little bit. And then he's threatening to call the cops for me assaulting him. I was like, call the cops and we'll see who they arrest.
When Charlene got home and found out what had happened, she kicked her husband out of the house and filed a restraining order against him. For 6 peaceful months, David and his family moved forward, while Brian went to live with his parents and sought help with anger management.
Honestly, we were happy. The whole family seemed to get more calm and better and be able to actually live together without yelling and screaming every day. It was pretty nice.
But soon, Brian came crawling back, promising a permanent change. And Charlene let her husband come home.
My mother talked to people from the church and her family and kind of believed, you got married, you stayed married, you worked through your problems. And, that was her belief. She didn't want to be a broken household and, father here, mother there.
David had mixed feelings about his father's return.
I wanted to believe it, but I think I knew that it was going to go back to the same way it was.
But soon, a new cloud of fear would settle over the Hummert family.
If it was meant to terrorize, mission accomplished.
And it would come from outside their home.
It was horrible. I think we lost a lot of nights of sleep.
Felt like I was protecting the entire rest of the family. It was a scary situation.
In early 2001, 17-year-old David Hummert was doing his best to keep peace within his family.
The relationship was still stressed, but I was trying to be there to help with my siblings.
It seemed like there was tension more between him and his father than anyone else in the family.
But that spring, David learned the family's biggest threat wasn't coming from inside the home.
My mother had called me one night and she's like, there's something going on you should know about. I haven't told your brother and sister yet. There's a guy following me around and he has photographs of her. She had taken like glamour shots from my father for a Christmas present. He had somehow gotten a hold of prints of them and was stalking her and had left letters at the house and on my father's car and on her car.
The stalker claimed he was following Charlene while she ran errands during the day, and he wrote, "The time is now right for payback." Terrified for their safety, Charlene and Brian called the police.
The one letter was very brief. It was directed towards Brian, and it basically said, "Your wife is a slut. The proof will be coming shortly." And then a short time after that was when the second letter was received, and that had the ripped up photographs of Charlene.
Charlene was very afraid when the stalking incident occurred. It had greatly shaken her up. If it was meant to cause fear, if it was meant to control, if it was meant to terrorize, mission accomplished.
But in the face of these fears, David's father had the opportunity to be the good guy, fighting for his family instead of against them.
The stress of the situation definitely took the focus off of the issues between my father and the rest of the family and focused it towards this guy that was out there everybody was paranoid about and wanted to catch. It united us against a common enemy.
After a few months, the letters stopped coming as abruptly as they started, and while the family was relieved, they still lived with an undercurrent of fear. In the summer of 2003, it seemed the stress had caught up with David's father. He suffered a severe heart attack that nearly killed him.
Came to see me, he was very apologetic and said, "I'm sorry, I know I haven't been a good father, I want to fix things, I want to be better." He couldn't deal with the stress of being angry all the time. He's like, "Being angry all the time is killing me and I'm gonna stop it." He was going to counseling and he was on medication and he seemed like a good guy, seemed like a totally changed person. And actually started believing that he was gonna change and was pretty happy about it.
But as Brian's health returned, so too did his violent temper.
8 to 12 weeks after he'd had the heart attack, he asked me to help him move some furniture out of the workshop he had in the basement upstairs, and he'd gotten a splinter in his hand, and he dropped the bench. So I asked him if he was all right, and he turns around, curses at me, and then picks the end of the bench up and just shoves it into my chest. And then I left. I was like, I couldn't deal with it.
David had reached his snapping point. He broke the news to his mother that he would not be coming back home, ever.
She had told me, "This isn't your fault, it's his fault." She's like, "I want to be done with it. I'm tired of being stressed every day." She just flat out said she wanted to leave him.
But Charlene wanted to wait until the school year was over before telling Brian she was done.
Me and my mother started looking at properties, trying to find like a 2 to 3 to 4 bedroom house that me, her, and my brother and sister could move into. And pretty much the plan was to move as much stuff as possible, as quickly as possible before he realized it, and then she was gonna file divorce papers.
David hoped there would soon be some permanent peace in their lives.
She was finding properties, I was finding properties. We had actually somewhat settled on a place, and we're finalizing if we were gonna put an offer in.
But the future plans David and his mother were so desperate to make a reality would never see the light of day.
It's what we would call a classic whodunit.
It was a complete mystery. We just knew that there was foul play.
When I couldn't get a hold of her, I was starting to get pretty worried. She pretty much vanished into thin air.
The night of March 19th, 2004, started out as any other Friday night for David Hummert.
Sometime around 4 or 5 o'clock, I ended up going out with my friends. Stayed out till probably about 4 o'clock in the morning on the 20th.
When David got home, he was stunned to find his father still awake in his study.
It was very unusual to see him up at 4 a.m. in the morning, and he's sitting in normal clothes, not in pajamas or anything. He was just sitting there. He seemed just out of it.
David asked what was wrong, and Brian admitted that he and Charlene had had a blowout fight and that a friend had picked her up.
It was very odd for my mother to just up and leave and not call me or not tell me, but I figured, well, she's finally pissed off enough, she's actually left.
But the next morning when David awoke, he noticed immediately that his mother's car was no longer in the driveway.
I asked my dad. He said that her truck was gone when he woke up, so she must have come in the middle of the night and got it. And he was just trying to let her blow off steam. So I placed probably 5-10 calls to my mother's cell phone, just trying to get a hold of her, see what was going on.
David's calls to his mother's cell phone went unanswered.
My dad, he said he went driving around looking for her. Couldn't find her car anywhere. It wasn't at any of the neighbors' houses or family members or anything. I was pretty concerned that maybe she was upset and got in a car accident or something had happened that we couldn't get hold of her.
David wanted to call the police, but Brian wasn't ready.
He's pretty matter-of-fact about it. He's like, oh, well, she has to be missing 24 hours.
My father, he had been to Brian's house, and Brian didn't seem upset. My father was very upset by that. This was his younger sister.
As day turned to night and Sunday morning approached, David's concern turned to panic. By now, Charlene had been missing for nearly 2 days. It was time to call the police.
On March 21st, 2004, I received a missing persons report. That officer spoke to Brian Hummert, who told the officer that he had not seen his wife since Friday night, the 19th. So the officer began a search for Charlene and the white Land Rover that she may be in. And a short time later, the officer discovered the Land Rover in the parking lot of a local food store.
Later that evening, David received a disturbing call from his father.
Yeah, he's like, you come home, I need to talk to you. I'm like, why? He's like, just, you need to come home, I'm not gonna tell you over the phone. I don't think I dropped below 100 miles an hour the whole way home. My brother and sister were there in the living room. I kind of knew that something bad happened. And he's like, they found your mom in her truck, she's dead. He's like, they don't know what happened. And at the time, I'm thinking it's like a car accident. They found her in the truck. The officer that was there was like, well, would you be able to come in for an interview sometime this week? We know it's going to be hard. And I'm like, an interview? Like what? And they're like, well, there's suspicious circumstances.
As the family mourned, police began taking a closer look at the details of Charlene's death.
At the autopsy, it was confirmed that Charlene strangled with a ligature. A ligature being something other than your hands. It's going to be a rope or a cable or something like that. And this was not an accidental or a natural death. Because of the suspicious nature, now we have a homicide investigation. We wanted to get a little bit more background from the family, as well as what else was going on in her life at that time.
I couldn't think who would possibly want to do this to my mother. Yeah, she helped everybody she knew. She was well-liked in the community. Really, the only thing I could think was this stalker.
Investigators immediately began taking another look at the threatening letters Charlene had received 3 years earlier. And when Brian confirmed his son's suspicions, police had their first lead.
Brian brought up this stalking incident and that if Charlene met an untimely death, it could be the work of this stalker.
Leaving no stone unturned, detectives gathered DNA samples from David and his family. They searched the Hummert home for any clues about what had happened to Charlene. They also continued their probing interviews. And that's when David noticed a disturbing trend.
As the time went on with the interviews, it seemed to be more and more pointing towards my father. The questions they were asking, a lot of background on financials and fighting in the household and issues that it could lead up to the motive, and it definitely seemed to be leading more and more and more towards him. I kind of tried to push it down and be as impartial as I could.
David clung to the possibility that a stranger had killed his mother, while his father began feeling the pressure of the investigation.
And he's like, they're trying to frame me. They always put it on the husband. Like, you should be careful. They're gonna try and implicate you in it.
But a new development was about to send everything into a forensic whirlwind.
It was one of those come on moments.
My initial reaction when I saw this letter was, we got him.
In April of 2004, as the investigation into his mother's murder picked up steam, David Hummert was distraught as he realized police seemed to be zeroing in on his father.
The police searched several times throughout the investigation. They were asking me a lot of questions about my father and arguments between my father and my mother.
But a strange new development was about to muddy the waters.
I received a letter at the police station. It was addressed to me. And basically this letter said, I killed Charlene Hummert, not Brian. The letters indicate that this person has killed before. This person's a serial killer. And the next day, the local newspaper received a letter that basically said the same thing. I killed Charlene Hummert, not Brian, but this one went into a little more detail, that only the actual murderer would know that he killed Charlene, brought her back to the house, drug her through the kitchen, then put her in her car.
And the author went on to taunt police, writing, "Cops have no idea how easy it is to try to pin husband."
For a serial killer to claim, I did it, not somebody else, that's almost unheard of. And it began to have some shades of the stalker letters. Because it was a handwritten letter, I was very hopeful that we were going to be able to match up the handwriting. So my initial reaction when I saw this letter was, we got him.
Police immediately sent the letters off for analysis. And that's when they discovered some undeniable similarities.
The author of the serial killer letters had the same linguistic tendencies, the same demographic, same background as the author of the stalker letters.
Armed with these details, police could now prove that the person who had stalked Charlene 3 years earlier was the very same person who had written letters confessing to her murder. Now the question was, who was he?
We knew it had to have been somebody who had to be close enough to Charlene to be able to get that close to her physically. There were different abrasions on her body. That meant she was already killed as she's being dragged through that driveway and loaded into the rear of her vehicle. So the killing had to have happened inside the house. It absolutely leads to only one conclusion, that Charlene Hummert was murdered in her house by Brian Hummert.
Police immediately issued search warrants for Brian's home and work computers. And what they found was shocking.
We were able to find those 2001 stalker letters and actually the photographs that were used in those incidents on Brian Hummert's computer. We also found hard copies of those documents and pictures in the house.
Police also found a makeshift dog leash, the very same type of cable used to strangle Charlene.
The dog cable was found in the computer room, and when the investigators saw it, they went, "Oh my God, that's it."
Brian Hummert was arrested for first-degree murder in November of 2004. For David and his family, the news cut like a knife.
There's relief, anger, sadness. I mean, even as much as I honestly hated the guy, I still didn't want to believe that my father could kill my mother.
It was extremely hard to realize that someone you had in your family did this. The more we found out, I believe, the harder it was on our family.
In May 2012, Brian Hummert was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison.
Honestly, it was kind of vindicating, of just getting the closure in my mind, saying it's finally done and I can move on with my life.
Today, David still struggles to come to terms with his mother's murder and his father's arrest. And the ordeal has taken its toll on his family.
I haven't spoken to either of my brother or sister since 2004. They've supported my father throughout the whole thing.
But through it all, David had the unwavering support of his mother's side of the family.
Our family has taken David in as a brother and a son because he doesn't have anyone else.
And while the pain of his mother's death is ever present, David strives to build a life he knows Charlene would be proud of.
I've tried to work hard and be good to other people, but there's probably not a day that goes by that I don't think about my mom. I miss being able to talk to her and get advice, and just, like, she always knew the right thing to do.
The sound that wakes the neighborhood is not a scream, not a siren, but the hollow thud of a door slamming somewhere before dawn, a noise so ordinary it barely registers, and yet years later people will swear that was the moment everything changed, the instant a quiet Florida street slipped into a story no one wanted to tell, a story that would harden into a cold case, then rot in silence, then suddenly explode back to life with a single word no one was prepared to hear: arrest. It is late summer in Florida, 2007, the air thick enough to feel like wet fabric pressed against the skin, the kind of heat that slows movement and dulls judgment, the kind of heat where windows stay open at night and porch lights burn until morning because it feels wrong to shut the world out completely. The neighborhood sits just far enough from the highway that the roar of traffic fades into a low, constant hum, just close enough to wetlands that frogs and insects carry the night. This is a place where people know each other's routines without meaning to, where a car starting at the same time every morning becomes part of the landscape, where absence is louder than presence. And absence is exactly what announces itself when the sun rises. A driveway is empty when it should not be. A phone rings and rings and rings. A routine breaks. Somewhere between midnight and morning, a woman disappears, not in a cinematic blur of violence, not with witnesses or alarms, but quietly, invisibly, like a light switched off behind a closed door. Her name will be printed soon enough, her face pulled from a family photo and enlarged until the pixels blur, but right now she is just a missing person, a question mark wrapped in Florida humidity. By the time police arrive, the house feels wrong in a way officers learn to recognize but never explain. Nothing appears ransacked. No obvious struggle. No shattered glass. The front door is closed. Inside, the air is stale, heavy, as if it has been holding its breath. A purse sits where it should not, keys nearby, the kind of detail that snaps an investigation into focus. People do not leave without those things. People do not step into the night barefoot, unprepared, unless something pushes them there or pulls them out. Neighbors gather at a distance, arms folded, voices low. Someone mentions seeing a car they did not recognize. Someone else insists they heard nothing at all. In Florida, silence is common. Windows are open, televisions hum, ceiling fans churn, and sounds blur together. What feels suspicious later feels unremarkable in the moment. The first patrol officers make notes, radio updates, and wait for detectives. Already, the clock is ticking, though no one says it out loud yet. Within hours, the word spreads. Missing. By afternoon, it sharpens. Possible foul play. By nightfall, the street glows with police lights, red and blue cutting across palm fronds and parked cars, reflections sliding over faces that cannot quite process what they are seeing. Reporters arrive quickly, drawn by the familiar gravity of a story that feels wrong but not yet monstrous. Cameras capture the house, the tape, the tight expressions of officers trained not to speculate. The victim's family arrives carrying disbelief like a physical weight. They walk through rooms that still smell like her shampoo, still hold her fingerprints on coffee mugs and door frames. Investigators ask careful questions, routine questions, questions that feel cruel simply because they exist. When was the last time you spoke to her? Did she mention any problems? Anyone who might want to hurt her? The family answers mechanically, clinging to the hope that this is all a misunderstanding, that she will walk back through the door apologizing for causing a fuss. Search teams fan out. K-9 units follow trails that dissolve into nothing. Helicopters circle over wetlands and wooded patches, over canals that glint darkly under the sun. Flyers go up on telephone poles, at grocery stores, gas stations, anywhere a face might catch a stranger's attention. Tips pour in, most useless, some disturbing, all demanding attention. Every call carries the possibility of resolution or disaster. Days pass. Then weeks. The story hardens. Missing turns into presumed dead without anyone ever saying the words out loud. Detectives reconstruct her life, hour by hour, text by text, transaction by transaction. Bank records. Phone pings. Security cameras that show nothing helpful, only fragments of normalcy that end too soon. The case file grows thick, then heavier, then stagnant. There are persons of interest, of course. There always are. A former partner whose name draws attention. A coworker with an odd timeline. A neighbor who keeps to himself. Each theory rises, flares, then collapses under scrutiny or lack of evidence. Without a body, without a weapon, without a confession, everything feels hypothetical, fragile, easily torn apart in court. Prosecutors hesitate. Investigators grind forward anyway, driven by instinct and obligation more than optimism. The community changes subtly. Porch lights stay on longer. Parents walk their children to school. Conversations lower when strangers pass. And then, slowly, life asserts itself again, as it always does. New families move in. Houses are repainted. The street looks normal, but the name of the missing woman lingers like a stain beneath fresh coats of paint. Years slide by. The case cools, then freezes. Files are boxed, evidence sealed, leads marked exhausted. A cold case unit inherits the story like a burden passed down through generations of detectives, each convinced they might see what others missed, each eventually confronting the same wall. Technology advances. DNA databases expand. Old evidence is re-examined, then returned to storage. Hope flares, dims, survives in small, stubborn ways. For the family, time does not heal so much as rearrange the pain. Holidays pass with an empty chair. Birthdays arrive without phone calls. They learn to live with uncertainty, with the cruelty of not knowing, with the quiet terror of imagining every possible ending. They push for attention when they can, attend anniversaries, speak to reporters, keep her name alive because forgetting feels like a second death. And then, long after the neighborhood has learned to breathe again, something shifts. A lab result. A database hit. A piece of evidence revisited not because it seemed promising, but because everything else had failed. A name surfaces, not new, but overlooked, underestimated, dismissed years earlier. The past surges forward, dragging secrets with it. Detectives lean over conference tables under harsh fluorescent lights, voices low, careful. Warrants are drafted. Timelines rebuilt. Surveillance resumes quietly, deliberately, because this time the margin for error is razor thin. Somewhere, an individual goes about daily life unaware that the ground beneath them is cracking. When the arrest finally comes, it does not happen with cinematic flair. It happens quickly, efficiently, a set of cuffs clicking closed, a suspect guided into the back of a vehicle. News breaks in fragments, alerts flashing across screens, headlines stacking one on top of another. Florida. 2007, cold case reopened. Unexpected arrest. The victim's family receives the call in a moment that does not resemble relief or closure so much as shock. Years of grief collide with the sudden weight of possibility. Answers might be coming. Or more pain. Or both. The name of the arrested individual hits them like a physical blow, dredging up memories they thought had dulled with time. In the neighborhood where it all began, people step outside again, drawn by the echo of sirens that feel strangely familiar. Porch lights flick on. Curtains move. A street that learned to forget is forced to remember. And as the cameras roll once more, As reporters speak of justice delayed and mysteries unraveling, one truth hangs in the air, heavy and unresolved. Reopening a cold case does not warm it. It cracks it open, releasing everything trapped inside, and no one, not the family, not the community, not the detectives who never let go, is ever quite prepared for what comes out next. The arrest does not erase the silence that followed her disappearance. It only rearranges it, turning quiet into a low, electric tension that hums beneath every conversation, every news update, every whispered phone call between relatives who have learned not to hope too loudly. In Florida, memory has a way of resurfacing when heat rises, and as headlines ripple outward, people begin to remember details they once dismissed, moments that felt insignificant until the word cold case was torn open and stitched back into the present. Back in 2007, detectives had stood in this same neighborhood asking the same questions, their notebooks filling with half-answers and contradictions. Who was home that night? Who heard something? Who saw a car? Memory then was unreliable, softened by shock and fear, warped by the desire not to be involved. Now, with an arrest announced, those memories sharpen painfully, each one demanding to be re-examined under a harsher light. Investigators return to old interviews, audio crackling with the voices of younger people who sound calmer than they should have been, more certain than the evidence ever justified. Timelines are rebuilt again, minute by minute, the way detectives always swear they will do better next time. Phone records that once seemed inconclusive are now mapped with precision, plotted against cell towers that did not exist when the case began. What technology could not see in 2007 begins to glow in 2025, like invisible ink suddenly revealed. The suspect, now in custody, is not a stranger pulled from nowhere. That is what makes the arrest so unsettling. This is a name buried in the original file, a person mentioned once, twice, maybe 3 times, never elevated to the top of the list, never pushed hard enough to break. Back then, the evidence had not been enough. Back then, doubt lived in the margins. Now, doubt has been replaced with probability, and probability is all prosecutors need to reopen a door long sealed shut. For the victim's family, the past returns with brutal clarity. They remember faces at the search parties, remember who offered help too eagerly, who stayed away entirely, who seemed to know more than they said. Grief distorts memory, but time distorts it differently, sanding off sharp edges while leaving the core intact. When they hear the suspect's name, something inside them locks into place, an instinctive reaction that feels older than reason. They do not celebrate. They brace. The media frames the story in bold strokes. Shocking arrest. Breakthrough in Florida cold case. Justice after nearly 2 decades. But justice is an abstract word when lived experience is chaos. The family understands that an arrest is not a conclusion, it is an opening argument. It is a promise that may yet be broken. They have watched other cold cases unravel in courtrooms, watched certainty dissolve under cross-examination, watched juries hesitate when evidence is old and memories are fragile. Behind the scenes, detectives feel the weight of scrutiny intensify. Every choice made in 2007 is now subject to modern judgment. Why was this lead not followed harder? Why was that witness cleared so quickly? Why did evidence sit untouched for years? Cold case work is always an indictment of time itself, but it is also an indictment of human limitation. Files do not speak unless someone asks the right question at the right moment. In the days following the arrest, the suspect says little. A lawyer appears quickly. The language of the case shifts from investigative to procedural. Charges are read carefully. Bail is denied. A judge's voice echoes in a courtroom where the victim's name has not been spoken aloud in years. The suspect stares forward, expression unreadable, a study in stillness that fuels speculation. Silence, once again, becomes the loudest element of the story. Old evidence is unsealed. Items collected from the original scene are brought into the light, photographed with modern equipment, examined by technicians who were not yet in the field when the crime occurred. Fibers, partial prints, trace DNA that once fell below thresholds now meet new standards. The science does not tell a story on its own. It offers fragments, probabilities, connections. It is up to humans to decide what those connections mean. The neighborhood reacts in waves. Some residents feel vindicated, convinced they always knew something was wrong, that the truth had merely been delayed. Others feel exposed, uneasy with the realization that a suspect lived among them for years, perhaps still does. There is anger, too, directed at the system, at the years lost, at the sense that this could have been resolved sooner if only someone had pushed harder, listened longer, looked deeper. For detectives assigned to the cold case unit, reopening the file is both validation and burden. They know the public sees resolution on the horizon, but they also know how fragile that horizon is. Evidence degrades. Witnesses die. Memories shift. Every interview now is haunted by the question of contamination. What has been influenced by news coverage, by shared narratives, by the simple passage of time? The family is asked to revisit moments they have spent years trying to bury. They are shown photographs, documents, timelines. They are asked to remember conversations, moods, offhand remarks. Trauma does not organize itself neatly, it resists chronology. Each request feels invasive, yet necessary. They comply because this is the price of possibility. As the case inches forward, rumors swell. Online forums dissect every available detail. Armchair detectives argue over theories, over guilt, over motive. The victim's life becomes content, her disappearance reduced to bullet points and speculation. The family learns to avoid comment sections, to protect themselves from narratives that feel like theft. And still, beneath the noise, a deeper question pulses. Why now? What changed? The answer lies not in a single revelation but in accumulation. A database expanded. A technician reconsidered a result. A detective refused to accept that nothing more could be done. Cold cases are not solved by miracles, they are solved by persistence that borders on obsession. As the prosecution builds its case, as defense attorneys prepare to dismantle it, the community holds its breath again, a familiar posture. Years ago, they waited for news that never came. Now, they wait for clarity that may finally arrive, or may fracture into more uncertainty. The arrest has reopened wounds that never healed, stirred a past that refused to stay buried. And as Florida's heat presses down once more, as cameras linger on courthouse steps and reporters rehearse familiar lines, the story shifts from disappearance to confrontation, from mystery to accusation. The cold case is no longer dormant. It is awake, volatile, and moving toward a reckoning that promises answers but guarantees nothing. When investigators begin laying the reopened timeline across the table, the past no longer feels distant. It feels compressed, as if the years between 2007 and now have folded in on themselves, forcing moments that were once scattered to collide. The night of her disappearance is reconstructed again, but this time with a level of scrutiny that borders on obsession. Every hour becomes a pressure point. Every gap becomes an accusation. She had been seen earlier that evening, nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. A routine night in a life that did not announce it was about to end. That ordinariness becomes unbearable in retrospect. Detectives focus on it the way surgeons focus on tissue around a wound, knowing the damage hides in what looks intact. Who spoke to her last? Who expected to see her again? Who knew she would be alone? Her phone activity stops abruptly, not with a frantic call, not with a final message, but with silence. In 2007, that silence meant little. Phones died, signals dropped, batteries failed. Now it is treated like a fingerprint. Analysts map the final pings, plotting her movements against cell towers that form an invisible grid over the city. The pattern does not scream abduction. It whispers deviation. A small change en route. A brief pause where there should not have been one. The suspect's movements are layered over hers. In the original investigation, this overlap was dismissed as coincidence. People live near each other. Paths cross. Florida roads funnel traffic into the same arteries. But coincidence erodes when revisited with context. When the timing aligns too cleanly. When denials conflict with data that did not exist the first time around. Detectives re-interview witnesses who are older now, wearier, less confident in their recollections. Some resist, irritated that a chapter they thought closed has been reopened. Others speak with a nervous urgency, as if relieved that someone is finally listening again. Stories shift subtly, not enough to scream deception, but enough to suggest fear or self-preservation. The truth, investigators know, is rarely delivered cleanly. It arrives distorted by memory and motive. One witness pauses too long before answering a question about that night. Another insists they were asleep, then later admits they woke briefly but thought nothing of it. These are not smoking guns. They are pressure cracks. In a cold case, pressure cracks matter. Attention turns to the suspect's relationship with the victim, a connection that was once described as peripheral, inconsequential. Now it is redefined as proximity. Not intimate, not public, but present. The kind of relationship that exists in the margins, easily overlooked, easily denied. Text messages recovered from old devices hint at familiarity, at access. Nothing overtly threatening. Nothing prosecutors could have used in 2007. But absence of threat does not equal absence of danger. The suspect maintains innocence, calmly, consistently. There is no emotional outburst, no visible panic. For seasoned detectives, this composure is neither proof nor comfort. They have seen guilt wrapped in rage and guilt wrapped in serenity. Behavior is a clue, not a conclusion. As the investigation deepens, a theory solidifies around opportunity rather than motive. This was not necessarily a crime of passion, detectives suggest, but one of convenience. A moment where vulnerability intersected with intent. The house, the routine, the expectation of safety, all of it formed a perfect equation for someone who knew how to exploit it. Search warrants are executed quietly, years after the fact. Storage units. Old vehicles. Boxes in garages that have not been opened since the year she vanished. Evidence recovered now carries the dust of time, but dust does not erase relevance. It complicates it. Forensic teams document everything, aware that defense attorneys will scrutinize every step, every chain of custody, every explanation for why this item was not found before. The victim's family watches this process unfold from the outside, receiving updates filtered through legal caution. They are told just enough to stay informed, not enough to feel secure. Hope becomes something dangerous again, a thing they had trained themselves not to touch. Each new development is followed by the same thought, unspoken but constant: what if this falls apart too? In the community, the narrative fractures. Some rally behind law enforcement, praising persistence, celebrating the idea that no one truly gets away forever. Others express doubt, suspicion that an arrest made so late must be compensating for something missing. Social media amplifies every opinion, turning uncertainty into spectacle. The victim's name trends briefly, then sinks beneath newer stories, leaving behind a trail of arguments and assumptions. Detectives know they are racing not just against the defense but against erosion. Evidence has an expiration date in the minds of jurors. Memories soften. Alibis blur. The prosecution must convince 12 people that truth can survive nearly 2 decades of decay. It is a brutal standard, but one the system demands. As preparations for trial begin, the suspect's past is dissected with equal intensity. Employment records. Relationships. Incidents that once seemed trivial now feel predictive. Patterns emerge, not necessarily criminal, but unsettling in hindsight. The defense counters with their own narrative, one of coincidence, of tunnel vision, of a justice system desperate to close a painful chapter. Through it all, the victim remains at the center, though she cannot speak. Her life is reduced to exhibits, timelines, and photographs displayed on screens in conference rooms. Investigators remind themselves constantly that she is not a symbol or a case number. She is the reason the file was reopened, the reason persistence mattered. Yet even as momentum builds, uncertainty shadows every step. There is still no body. No definitive scene of violence. No confession. The case rests on convergence, on inference, on the belief that multiple small truths can assemble into one undeniable reality. Cold cases often hinge on this kind of mosaic, fragile and resilient at the same time. Late at night, detectives sit alone with the file, reading reports they have memorized, searching for weak points, for questions the defense will ask that they cannot answer cleanly. Doubt is not a sign of failure, it is a tool. But doubt also feeds fear, the fear that after all this, the ending will still be inconclusive. For the family, sleep becomes elusive again. Dreams replay the early days of the disappearance, then jump forward to images of courtrooms they have not yet entered. They rehearse reactions they hope they will never have to perform. Relief. Rage. Collapse. They know whatever comes will not restore what was taken, only redefine what remains. As Florida's nights stretch long and humid, as thunderheads build and break over the city, the reopened case presses forward, driven by momentum that feels both inevitable and fragile. The mystery that once seemed frozen is now fluid, dangerous, alive. And somewhere between accusation and proof, between memory and evidence, the truth waits, not patiently, but stubbornly, daring everyone involved to get it wrong one more time. As the case moves closer to court, the tone shifts from discovery to confrontation, and the air around everyone involved tightens, as if the entire system has drawn a collective breath it is no longer sure how to release. The reopened Florida cold case is no longer just an investigation. It is an argument waiting to happen, a collision between what can be proven and what can only be felt, between science refined by time and memories eroded by it. Prosecutors begin assembling the story they believe the evidence now supports, a narrative that must feel inevitable rather than convenient. They know jurors distrust late revelations. They know every unanswered question will echo louder because of the years attached to it. So they work backward, then forward, then backward again, stress-testing every assumption. Why this suspect? Why this moment? Why now? Each answer must withstand attack. They focus on opportunity, because opportunity survives time better than motive. Motive fades, rationalizes, reshapes itself. Opportunity leaves footprints. Phone data, location overlaps, access points, the geography of routine. In 2007, these elements were fragments. Now they form patterns that feel uncomfortable in their precision. The suspect's movements no longer exist in isolation. They intersect repeatedly with the victim's last known window of normalcy. Defense attorneys see the same patterns and prepare to call them coincidences sharpened by hindsight. They argue technology has created false certainty, that mapping data onto human behavior years later is interpretation, not fact. They rehearse questions designed to plant doubt gently but relentlessly. Isn't it true this tower covers miles? Isn't it true phones can be carried by someone else? Isn't it true these records were unavailable at the time? Meanwhile, forensic analysts revisit physical evidence with a care that borders on reverence. Items collected from the original scene are handled again, photographed again, tested again. Each procedure is documented meticulously, because the defense will demand to know why this result matters now when it did not then. The answer is simple and dangerous: science changed. Standards changed. Thresholds changed. But truth, prosecutors will argue, did not. The victim's family is brought into this phase cautiously. They are warned about the slow violence of legal language, about how their loved one's life will be dissected not to honor it but to contextualize it. They nod, understanding without accepting. They have waited years for someone to say her name with purpose rather than sympathy. Now they are being asked to trust a process that once failed them. Depositions begin. Former witnesses sit across from attorneys in quiet rooms, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Some struggle to remember. Others remember too much, details that sound rehearsed, polished by time and retelling. Attorneys listen not just for content but for rhythm, for hesitation, for cracks that can be widened later. The past, once static, becomes adversarial. One witness contradicts an earlier statement in a small but significant way. Another admits they downplayed their proximity to the suspect out of fear or embarrassment. These revelations do not explode, they accumulate. In a cold case, accumulation is power. Each inconsistency adds weight to the argument that the original investigation missed something not because it was careless, but because it was incomplete. The suspect's silence continues, disciplined and absolute. In public, there is no display of remorse or outrage. In court filings, the defense maintains a steady drumbeat of denial. The absence of emotion becomes its own spectacle, interpreted endlessly by commentators and strangers alike. But detectives know better than to read meaning into demeanor. Guilt does not announce itself reliably. Innocence does not either. As pretrial hearings unfold, the courtroom becomes a theater of restraint. Motions are argued about admissibility, about what jurors should and should not hear. The defense challenges the reopening itself, implying desperation, suggesting pressure from the family, from the media, from the myth that all cold cases deserve closure. Prosecutors counter with facts, with timelines, with the assertion that justice delayed is not justice denied if it arrives intact. Outside the courthouse, the story hardens into headlines again. Florida cold case advances toward trial. Family hopes for answers. Legal experts debate viability. The victim's photograph appears once more on screens and pages, frozen in a moment that predates everything that followed. She becomes familiar to people who never knew her, a symbol of unresolved violence, of time's cruelty. Behind closed doors, detectives feel a different pressure. They know the trial will become a referendum on their persistence. If the case collapses, it will not just be a loss, it will be an indictment of reopening itself. They revisit their work obsessively, imagining cross-examinations, anticipating weaknesses. They remind themselves that certainty is not the goal, coherence is. The defense strategy crystallizes around absence. No body. No crime scene definitively linked to violence. No eyewitness to an act. They plan to ask jurors to sit with that absence, to feel its weight, to question whether narrative can substitute for proof. They will suggest alternative explanations without committing to any of them, letting uncertainty do the work. Prosecutors prepare to counter with presence. Presence of patterns. Presence of access. Presence of behavior inconsistent with innocence when viewed holistically. They will argue that crimes do not require spectacle to be real, that violence can be quiet, that disappearance itself can be evidence when context is overwhelming. The victim's family begins to understand the paradox of progress. Each step forward pulls them deeper into the machinery of the case. They are asked to testify about last conversations, about routines, about changes so subtle they once dismissed them. They relive the moment hope first died, then resurrected itself years later with the promise of accountability. Sleep becomes fragmented. Anxiety spikes at odd moments, triggered by legal jargon, by calendar dates, by the sound of a phone notification. They rehearse testimony in their minds, afraid of saying too much, afraid of saying too little. They fear the defense will weaponize their grief, paint it as bias. They fear the jury will not feel what feels obvious to them. As jury selection approaches, the city hums with the low awareness of something significant unfolding. Most people will not attend the trial. Most will only absorb fragments. But for those closest to it, the case has consumed years of emotional oxygen. Now it demands breath again. The courtroom itself feels neutral, almost indifferent. Wood, glass, flags. A place designed to absorb conflict without reacting to it. When the victim's name is spoken there for the first time in years, it lands heavily, a reminder that this is not an abstract exercise. This is about a woman who vanished into silence and a system attempting to speak back to that silence with authority. As opening statements loom, the tension settles into something colder, more deliberate. The case is no longer about discovery. It is about persuasion. About whether 12 strangers can be led through nearly 2 decades of absence and emerge convinced that truth survived intact. Outside, Florida's heat presses down as relentlessly as it did in 2007. Time has passed, but the atmosphere feels eerily familiar. Once again, the community waits. Once again, a family balances on the edge of hope and devastation. And once again, a cold case, reopened and exposed, moves toward a moment that will not end the story, but will forever change how it is remembered. The trial begins without ceremony, because ceremony would suggest resolution, and nothing about a cold case ever feels resolved at the moment it finally reaches a courtroom. There is no gasp, no dramatic pause, only the quiet shuffle of jurors taking their seats, the muted scrape of chairs against the floor, the low murmur of a room preparing to absorb a story that has been waiting nearly 2 decades to be told out loud. Prosecutors rise first, their voices controlled, deliberate, carrying the weight of years compressed into hours. They do not promise certainty. They promise clarity. They tell the jury this case is about disappearance as evidence, about patterns that refuse to be accidental, about a woman who stepped into an ordinary Florida night and never returned. They speak her name slowly, carefully, anchoring it in the room so it cannot drift into abstraction. They describe the neighborhood as it was in 2007, the routines, the predictable rhythms, the expectation of safety. They describe how that expectation became a vulnerability, how familiarity can be weaponized by someone who understands it intimately. They do not yet name the suspect. They let the absence speak first. The defense listens impassively, taking notes, waiting. When it is their turn, they stand and immediately lower the temperature of the room. They speak of doubt as a virtue, of restraint as justice. They remind jurors that speculation is not proof, that time corrodes memory and inflates coincidence. They emphasize what is missing: no body, no eyewitness, no confession. They warn against filling gaps with emotion. From the first witness, the tension becomes palpable. A responding officer from 2007 takes the stand, older now, voice steady but distant. He describes the initial call, the house, the items left behind. His testimony is factual, stripped of interpretation, but the jury watches closely, searching his face for something more. Time has softened his recollection, but not erased it. He remembers the feeling that something was wrong even before the evidence supported it. Detectives follow, walking jurors through the early days of the investigation. Search efforts. Canvassing. Dead ends. They admit mistakes without dwelling on them, careful not to appear defensive. They explain the limits of the era, the technology that did not exist, the standards that constrained them. The prosecution frames these limitations not as failures, but as context. The defense frames them as cracks. Then the case pivots to the present. Analysts testify about cell phone data, about how towers interact with devices, about probabilities and overlaps. Charts appear on screens, lines tracing movement through time and space. The jury leans forward. The defense counters with its own expert, who agrees with the science but disputes the certainty, reminding jurors that coverage areas are broad, that assumptions can mislead. The argument becomes subtle, technical, dangerous in its complexity. Witnesses from the victim's life take the stand, and the tone shifts. Friends describe routines, habits, plans that never came to pass. Family members speak of last conversations, voices breaking despite efforts to remain composed. The courtroom grows heavy. Jurors avert their eyes, not out of disinterest, but out of discomfort with intimacy they did not ask for. The defense objects sparingly, aware that appearing callous could backfire. When the suspect's name is finally spoken as more than a reference, the room tightens. The prosecution lays out the connection carefully, avoiding sensationalism. They show how paths crossed, how access existed, how opportunities aligned. They present evidence recovered years later, explain why it matters now. The defense seizes on every delay, every question of contamination, every possibility that evidence has been reshaped by time. Cross-examination becomes a battle of tone as much as content. Defense attorneys are polite, surgical, planting seeds rather than hacking branches. They ask why certain leads were not pursued harder, why other individuals were cleared. They suggest tunnel vision without accusing it outright. Prosecutors object when necessary, but mostly allow the exchange, trusting the accumulation of facts to outweigh insinuation. The suspect sits motionless throughout, eyes forward, hands folded. Jurors glance at him often, then look away, uncertain what they are supposed to see. Is stillness confidence or calculation? Is silence restraint or strategy? The court offers no guidance. As days pass, fatigue sets in. Jurors juggle jobs and families with the weight of the testimony. The story seeps into their private thoughts, follows them home in fragments. They are instructed not to discuss it, but silence does not prevent imagination. The absence at the center of the case becomes personal. Midway through the trial, a key witness takes the stand, someone whose earlier statements had shifted over time. The prosecution frames the change as honesty finally overcoming fear. The defense frames it as unreliability sharpened by publicity. The witnesses' hands tremble slightly as they speak. The jury watches closely, attuned to every hesitation. This is not a moment of revelation. It is a moment of discomfort, where truth feels close but refuses to settle. For the victim's family, sitting just feet away, each word lands like a physical blow. They have waited years to hear these details acknowledged in public, and now that they are, the experience feels invasive, almost violent. They are asked to relive the worst chapter of their lives in a room full of strangers trained to remain neutral. They comply because this is the price of possibility. The prosecution rests its case not with a flourish, but with a quiet insistence. They remind jurors that crimes do not always announce themselves, that disappearance can be an act of violence, that patterns matter when singular proof is unavailable. They ask the jury to consider the totality, not the gaps. The defense responds with a closing that leans heavily on restraint. They warn against the seduction of narrative, against the belief that every mystery must have a villain within reach. They argue that the state has built a story, not a case, and that stories are dangerous when liberty is at stake. They ask jurors to sit with uncertainty, to recognize it as reasonable doubt. As closing arguments conclude, the room exhales collectively, though no one feels relieved. The judge gives instructions, words polished by repetition, reminding jurors of their duty, of standards, of the gravity of decision. The jury files out, carrying the case with them into deliberation, into a space where voices will finally collide without oversight. Outside the courtroom, cameras wait. Commentators speculate. Experts analyze. The victim's family retreats from the noise, gathering in quiet spaces, clinging to each other. They know this phase is beyond their control. Hope and dread blur together until they are indistinguishable. Deliberations stretch on. Hours become days. Notes are sent to the judge requesting clarifications, reread testimony, definitions. Each request sends ripples through the courtroom when proceedings briefly resume. Faces search for meaning in every movement. The community watches from a distance, divided between faith in the process and suspicion of its limits. Some believe this is justice finally catching up. Others believe it is a system reaching backward to justify itself. Both views coexist, uneasily. When the jury finally signals it has reached a verdict, the courtroom fills again, heavier than before. The defendant stands. The family holds their breath. The verdict is read, words delivered in a neutral tone that feels almost cruel in its restraint. Whatever the outcome, one truth becomes immediately clear: the verdict does not end the story. It reframes it. If there is conviction, questions will remain, appeals will follow, absence will persist. If there is acquittal, the cold case will fracture further, leaving behind a different kind of silence, one that feels even colder than before. As people file out, as microphones capture reactions, as headlines begin to write themselves, the weight of the case settles unevenly across everyone involved. Justice, delayed and contested, has spoken in a language that satisfies no one completely. The woman who vanished in 2007 is still gone. Her absence still shapes lives, conversations, and nights when sleep refuses to come. The cold case, reopened and argued and judged, has not warmed. It has only revealed how deeply the cold had set in, and how impossible it is to fully thaw a past that never stopped hurting. After the verdict is read, time behaves strangely, stretching and compressing in ways no one can predict. The courtroom empties in fragments, voices low, footsteps measured, as if sound itself has become dangerous. Outside, Florida sunlight floods the steps with indifference, the same sun that shone on the search parties years earlier, the same heat pressing down on faces now etched with exhaustion rather than hope. The legal moment has passed, but the emotional one is just beginning, and it will not move in a straight line. For the victim's family, the verdict does not land as a single emotion. It arrives in layers. Relief collides with disbelief. Validation tangles with rage. Even if the jury has spoken in their favor, even if the word guilty has been placed carefully into the public record, nothing feels finished. Closure is a word other people use. For them, there is only adjustment, the slow recalibration of a life that has learned to function around absence. If the verdict is not what they hoped for, the impact is different but no less severe. Acquittal does not feel like freedom for the defendant so much as erasure for the victim. It sharpens every doubt they have carried for years, confirms the deepest fear that truth can dissolve under scrutiny, that certainty is a luxury reserved for cases with bodies and blood and undeniable proof. In either outcome, the courtroom has not returned what was taken. It has only spoken about it. The defendant is led away or released into a corridor of cameras and murmurs, depending on the words read moments earlier. In either scenario, the face remains controlled, unreadable. Silence follows them like a shield. Commentators will later debate demeanor, dissecting posture and expression as if meaning can be excavated from muscle memory. Detectives resist that impulse. They know better than most that the human body is a poor witness. In the days that follow, the community processes the outcome in fragments, through headlines and overheard conversations, through social media posts that declare certainty with alarming confidence. Some feel reassured, convinced that persistence paid off, that time bent eventually toward accountability. Others feel uneasy, unsettled by the idea that so much hinged on inference, on patterns assembled years later. The verdict does not unify opinion. It divides it along invisible lines of trust and skepticism. Law enforcement releases carefully worded statements, praising the work of investigators past and present, emphasizing dedication, resilience, commitment to victims. Between the lines lies an unspoken acknowledgement of fallibility. Cold cases are monuments to what was missed as much as what was found. Detectives involved in the original investigation feel this acutely. Some take solace in resolution, partial or complete. Others replay old decisions in their minds, wondering how close they came to a different ending. The cold case unit, already understaffed and overburdened, absorbs the outcome quietly. Success brings new pressure. Failure brings scrutiny. Either way, the message is clear: reopening the past carries consequences. Files are returned to shelves or marked closed with annotations that will be read by someone else years from now. The cycle continues. For the family, life does not return to normal, because normal no longer exists. They navigate a strange new phase where strangers recognize them, where condolences arrive belatedly, where interviews are requested again, this time with a different angle. They learn to say no. They learn to protect their private grief from public appetite. They learn that being right does not mean being whole. Anniversaries take on new shapes. The date of disappearance remains heavy, but now it shares space with a verdict date that feels equally charged. Memory reorganizes itself around these markers, building a calendar that others cannot see. Sleep improves for some, worsens for others. Grief does not obey logic. Behind closed doors, attorneys begin their next steps. Appeals are filed or anticipated. Motions are drafted. Legal language churns onward, indifferent to emotional fatigue. The case, though judged, is not static. It exists in a state of conditional finality, always subject to revision, reinterpretation, reversal. The family learns to live with that uncertainty, again. The absence of a body continues to haunt every version of the story. It is mentioned less now, but it remains central, a silent witness no one can summon. Without it, some questions will never be answered. Where she went. How she died. What she saw in her final moments. Speculation fills the void, but speculation is not relief. It is torment disguised as curiosity. Detectives revisit those unanswered questions privately, not because they expect to solve them now, but because unresolved threads demand attention. Some search for burial sites long after the trial, driven by instinct more than evidence. Others consult maps, revisit witness statements, chase faint possibilities. This work is rarely publicized. It is done for conscience, not credit. The suspect's name becomes associated permanently with the case, regardless of outcome. In conviction, it is cemented. In acquittal, it lingers in controversy. Either way, identity is reshaped by accusation. Families on both sides carry stigma, anger, defensiveness. They retreat from public spaces, from conversations that feel loaded. The ripple effects spread outward, touching people who never chose to be part of the story. Media attention fades gradually, replaced by newer tragedies, newer mysteries. The case slips from the front page to the archives, resurfacing occasionally in think pieces or anniversary coverage. To the public, it becomes another example, another data point in debates about cold cases, technology, justice delayed. To those who lived it, it remains immediate, raw, unfinished. Years after the verdict, someone will still ask what really happened. Someone will still question whether the right person was held accountable, whether the system worked or merely functioned. Cold cases invite that skepticism because they exist at the intersection of time and uncertainty. They remind us that truth is not always loud or timely, and that justice, when it arrives late, carries scars. For the victim's family, the story narrows again, returning to something smaller and more private. They remember her not as a headline, not as a case, but as a presence that once filled rooms. They tell stories that predate the disappearance, laugh at memories that feel almost forbidden. They carry her forward in ways the courtroom never could. On the street where it all began, life continues in quiet defiance of memory. New residents walk dogs past houses that hold secrets they will never know. Children play in driveways that once filled with police cars. The past is laid beneath the present, invisible unless you know where to look. And somewhere in the system, a file marked Florida 2007 cold case sits closed or closing, its spine worn, its pages heavy with the weight of what could and could not be proven. It stands as a reminder that reopening the past is an act of faith, one that risks disappointment as often as it promises truth. The case no longer asks who did this. It asks something harder, something more unsettling. What does justice look like when time has erased certainty? What does accountability mean when answers arrive incomplete? And how do the living move forward when the dead cannot speak? The verdict, whatever it was, has not ended the story. It has only shifted its gravity, pulling attention away from investigation and toward aftermath. The cold case, once frozen, now exists in a different state, no warmer, but no longer dormant. It lingers, heavy and unresolved in ways no legal outcome can fully address, reminding everyone involved that some mysteries do not end. They echo. In the months that follow, the case refuses to stay confined to the courtroom where it was argued and judged. It leaks into everyday life, into conversations overheard in grocery store aisles, into late-night radio call-ins, into online threads where certainty is claimed by people who have never touched the evidence. The Florida 2007 cold case becomes something else now, no longer just an investigation or a trial, but a reference point, a shorthand for unresolved truth and delayed reckoning. For the victim's family, the noise is relentless at first. Journalists circle back with new questions, framing the story through the lens of aftermath. How does it feel now? Do you believe justice was served? What comes next? Each question feels misaligned, as if they assume a destination has been reached. The family answers cautiously or not at all, learning that silence can be a form of self-defense. They know the public wants closure. They also know closure is not something that can be delivered on schedule. Privately, they struggle with the strange vacuum that follows intensity. For years, the case gave shape to their grief, offered a focus, a sense of direction. Now that momentum has slowed, grief becomes diffuse again, less organized, more intrusive. There are moments of calm, even gratitude, followed by sudden spikes of anger or sorrow triggered by something trivial, a song, a scent, a passing remark. The nervous system does not understand verdicts. Investigators involved in the reopened case experience a similar disorientation. The work that consumed them has ended or moved into maintenance mode, appeals, and paperwork handled by others. They return to desks piled with new files, new names, new disappearances. But the old case lingers in their minds, a benchmark against which everything else is measured. They ask themselves whether persistence made the difference, or luck, or timing, or some combination impossible to quantify. Some detectives revisit their own notes late at night, not because protocol demands it, but because conscience does. They wonder whether there were signs they ignored, instincts they dismissed. Cold cases do that. They turn hindsight into a weapon that never dulls. Others find solace in the idea that doing something, even late, mattered more than doing nothing. The defense team retreats into professional routine, their role complete but not forgotten. In acquittal, they are praised by some for upholding the standard of proof, criticized by others for obstructing justice. In conviction, they prepare for appeals, 4 years of legal maneuvering that may yet alter the outcome. They are accustomed to this ambiguity. The law thrives on it. Human beings do not. Public interest wanes unevenly. Some move on quickly, their attention captured by fresher tragedies. Others remain fixated, drawn to the unresolved aspects, the missing body, the lingering doubts. Podcasts revisit the case, dissecting transcripts, speculating about evidence not presented at trial. The victim's life is reframed again and again, filtered through voices that never knew her, turning memory into content. The family learns to coexist with these retellings, to compartmentalize them. They remind themselves that no version of the story told by strangers will ever be definitive. They cling to the truth they lived, the person they lost, the reality that predates every headline. Anniversaries arrive quietly now. The search vigils have stopped. The cameras no longer gather. But the family still marks the day in private, lighting candles, sharing memories, acknowledging the passage of another year without answers they can hold in their hands. They have learned that remembrance does not require witnesses. In the wider community, the case subtly alters perception. People speak more openly about cold cases, about the fragility of certainty, about how easily a routine life can fracture. Parents caution children differently. Neighbors watch each other more closely, not with suspicion exactly, but with awareness sharpened by example. The story becomes a cautionary tale without clear lessons. Law enforcement agencies reference the case internally when discussing the value and risk of reopening old files. It is cited in training sessions, in debates about resource allocation, about technological dependence, about the ethics of delayed prosecution. It becomes part of institutional memory, stripped of emotion, distilled into takeaways that cannot fully capture its human cost. The absence of physical resolution continues to haunt every retelling. Without remains, without a definitive scene, imagination fills the gap. Some believe answers are buried somewhere, waiting. Others accept that some truths dissolve entirely, leaving only outlines. The family oscillates between these positions, hope and resignation coexisting uneasily. Years pass in this uneasy equilibrium. The case settles into a strange afterlife, neither active nor forgotten. Occasionally, a new tip arrives, prompted by renewed attention or a guilty conscience stirred too late. Most go nowhere. A few reopen old wounds briefly before fading. Detectives follow up when possible, driven by habit as much as duty. The suspect's name remains tethered to the case in public consciousness, regardless of legal outcome. It surfaces in background checks, in whispered conversations, in the careful way people choose their words. Identity becomes inseparable from accusation. This, too, is a consequence of cold cases that rarely receives attention. For the family, healing becomes less about answers and more about endurance. They build routines that acknowledge loss without being defined by it. They celebrate milestones with an empty space that is no longer shocking, just quietly present. They learn that moving forward does not mean moving on. On the street where it all began, the physical traces are long gone. The house has changed hands. Paint colors differ. Landscaping has been redone. Nothing marks it as significant. And yet, for those who know, it remains a landmark of absence, a reminder that violence does not always leave visible scars. The Florida heat cycles through seasons, oppressive and familiar. Time continues its indifferent march. But the cold case, reopened and argued and absorbed into memory, resists finality. It sits in the collective consciousness as a question rather than an answer, a reminder that justice, even when pursued relentlessly, cannot always reconstruct what was lost. What remains is a quieter understanding, harder to articulate but impossible to ignore. That some stories do not conclude so much as fade, their edges blurred by time and interpretation. That accountability and truth are not synonyms. And that the past, once disturbed, never fully settles again. The case does not demand attention anymore. It does something more subtle. It lingers, influencing how people think about disappearance, about certainty, about the faith they place in systems designed by humans as flawed as themselves. And in that lingering, the Florida 2007 cold case finds its final, uneasy form. Not a resolution. Not a mystery. But an echo, persistent and unresolved, carrying the weight of a life interrupted and a truth forever shaped by the time it took to reach for it. Years later, the case resurfaces not with urgency, but with inevitability, dragged back into public consciousness by anniversaries, by a new documentary series, by a journalist chasing unresolved endings. The Florida 2007 cold case no longer feels contemporary, yet it refuses to age gracefully. It exists in that uncomfortable space where time has passed but clarity has not arrived, where distance only sharpens certain questions instead of dulling them. The renewed attention does not come with fresh evidence. It comes with perspective. Long-form investigations revisit the timeline, replay testimony, scrutinized decisions made by people who believed they were doing the best they could with what they had. Archival footage is juxtaposed with present-day interviews, faces older, voices more cautious. Memory becomes the main character, unreliable and insistent. For the victim's family, this resurgence is exhausting in a different way. They are no longer fighting for action or awareness. They are being asked to participate in reflection, to comment on legacy, to speak as if the story belongs to history rather than to their daily lives. Some agree, hoping that careful storytelling might prevent distortion. Others decline, unwilling to reopen wounds for an audience that consumes pain as narrative. The documentaries and articles focus on the gaps, the moments where everything might have turned differently. A lead that stalled. A witness who hesitated. A piece of evidence that sat untested until technology caught up. These moments are framed as lessons, as warnings. But lessons extracted from tragedy always feel incomplete. They do not change what happened. They only explain why it cannot be undone. Experts weigh in with confidence that borders on arrogance. They dissect the case as if it were a puzzle rather than a life, debating probabilities, speculating about motives, suggesting alternative theories. The absence of definitive physical proof gives them room to maneuver. Every unanswered question becomes an invitation. The family learns to tune out these voices, recognizing that curiosity without consequence is easy. Within law enforcement circles, the case becomes a reference point again, this time for institutional introspection. Agencies discuss how cold case units are staffed, how evidence is preserved, how early assumptions can calcify into blind spots. The Florida case is cited not as a triumph or a failure, but as a cautionary example of complexity. It reminds investigators that persistence alone does not guarantee clarity. Detectives who worked the case years earlier watch these retrospectives with mixed feelings. Some feel vindicated, grateful that the nuance of their work is finally acknowledged. Others feel exposed, uneasy with decisions made under pressure now dissected in hindsight. They know the audience rarely sees the constraints, the sleepless nights, the choices made with imperfect information. The suspect, now a permanent fixture in the story, becomes a focal point of renewed debate. In conviction, commentators analyze whether justice was sufficient, whether unanswered questions undermine confidence. In acquittal, they argue whether suspicion should linger, whether legal outcomes reflect moral truth. The individual at the center of these debates becomes increasingly abstract, reduced to a role rather than a person. The family experiences this abstraction acutely. They see their loved one transformed repeatedly, reframed to fit different narratives. Sometimes she is portrayed as a symbol of vulnerability. Sometimes as a catalyst for reform. Rarely as a full human being with contradictions and ordinary flaws. The family pushes back quietly, telling their own stories in private, reclaiming her complexity where cameras cannot reach. Public fascination eventually fades again, as it always does. The cycle of attention moves on. But something has shifted. The case has left a residue in the collective understanding of cold cases. It has made people more aware of how easily stories solidify before evidence does, how difficult it is to disentangle truth from narrative once time has passed. For the family, the long view brings a kind of reluctant acceptance. Not acceptance of what happened, but acceptance of what will never be known. They stop waiting for a moment when everything will make sense. They stop expecting the system to deliver emotional resolution. They focus instead on living alongside ambiguity, a skill they never wanted to learn but have mastered through necessity. There are still moments when hope flickers unexpectedly. A call that turns out to be nothing. A rumor that dissolves under scrutiny. Each time, they reset, reminding themselves that chasing certainty can become its own form of harm. The physical absence remains the most stubborn element of the case. Without remains, the story lacks an anchor. The earth holds its secrets. Landscapes change. What might once have been recoverable is now indistinguishable from its surroundings. This reality is acknowledged quietly by those closest to the case. Some truths, once missed, do not wait patiently. The Florida neighborhood where it began continues its slow evolution. New families move in unaware of the history beneath their feet. Streets are repaved. Trees grow taller. The ordinary rhythm of life asserts itself again and again, indifferent to the stories that preceded it. Only a few long-term residents remember, and even they struggle to articulate what remains unsettled. In the end, the case does not offer a moral. It offers a discomfort. It reminds anyone who looks closely that justice is a process, not a moment, and that processes designed by humans will always reflect human limitation. It shows how time can be both an ally and an enemy, revealing patterns while erasing certainty. The Florida 2007 cold case, reopened and argued and retold, settles into its final position not as a solved mystery, but as a contested memory. A story shaped by evidence, by absence, by belief, and by the relentless passage of years. And for those who carry it closest, the case is no longer something to be solved. It is something to be endured, woven into identity, acknowledged without expectation. The echo persists, quieter now, but no less present, reminding them that some questions do not demand answers so much as respect for the silence they leave behind. It starts with something small again, because in cold cases the universe rarely announces itself with fireworks. It starts with a phone call that comes in on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of afternoon where the air conditioner fights a losing battle against Florida heat, where the world feels routine enough to be trusted, where the family has just begun to believe they can breathe without waiting for the next headline to punch them in the chest. The caller doesn't sound excited. The caller sounds careful, professional, controlled. And that restraint, that deliberate calm, is the first warning flare. Something has changed. Not a verdict change. Not an appeal decision. Something else. Something physical. Something that has been sitting quietly in the earth while everyone argued in courtrooms. The voice on the line doesn't say, "We found her." It doesn't say, "We know." It says, "We may have located an item of interest," which is law enforcement language for, prepare yourself for the worst without letting us promise anything. The family hears the gap between those words and fills it instantly, because they've spent years filling gaps, because that's what cold cases force you to become, an expert in absence. The place is not dramatic. It's not a hidden cabin in the woods or some cinematic swamp shack. It's mundane Florida geography, a stretch of land where development has been creeping for years, where bulldozers chew through soil that once held only weeds and mosquitoes, where new subdivisions rise on old silence. Construction workers found something while clearing a drainage ditch, metal glinting beneath mud, a shape that made one of them stop and stare long enough to call a supervisor instead of kicking it aside. When detectives arrive, they don't rush. They don't run. They move like people who have learned the cost of moving too fast. They tape off the area. They photograph. They document. The afternoon sun bakes the scene, and the workers stand back with arms crossed, watching, suddenly aware that the ground they've been tearing open might be holding a story older than their job. The family is asked to wait. Of course they're asked to wait. Waiting is the one constant the case has ever reliably delivered. They sit in a room that feels too bright, listening to clocks, watching phones, counting breaths, trying not to imagine the item in a plastic evidence bag, trying not to decide what it is before anyone tells them. But their minds do it anyway. A necklace. A keychain. A ring. Something she wore. Something she touched. Something she carried. A fragment of her life that could survive in mud longer than her name could survive in a news cycle. When the detectives return, the object is not presented like a holy relic. It is presented like evidence, bagged, labeled, handled with gloves. It is small enough to fit in a palm and heavy enough to tilt reality. The family recognizes it immediately, or thinks they do. Recognition is a dangerous thing. It can be true, or it can be hope wearing the mask of certainty. A forensic team is assigned. The item is tested, swabbed, photographed under different light. Compared to old records, photos from 2007, descriptions from missing person reports, details that were once scribbled down in the chaos of early investigation. In a cold case, paperwork becomes prophecy. A line someone wrote in a hurry 18 years ago suddenly matters more than it ever did. And then the next call comes, sharper than the first. The item is consistent with something she owned. Consistent. Not confirmed. Not proven. But consistent enough to justify a search. Search warrants move through the system like old machinery grinding back to life. A grid is drawn over a patch of land that no one has cared about for years. Cadaver dogs are brought in. Ground-penetrating radar units roll across uneven soil. Investigators stand under the brutal sun, staring at screens, looking for anomalies that might be nothing or everything. The family is kept at a distance, again, because the process demands it, because the process always demands it. The media catches wind quickly. Cameras appear at the perimeter. Microphones reach toward anyone who looks official. Headlines begin writing themselves before anyone has proof. New clue in Florida cold case. Possible remains search underway. Family bracing for answers. The public appetite wakes up, hungry again, as if the story is a faucet that can be turned on and off whenever something glints in the dirt. Online, strangers argue instantly. Some say this proves guilt, proves justice, proves the arrest was correct all along. Others say it proves the opposite, that if the body wasn't found, the case was incomplete, that everything was rushed, that the system is guessing. People speak like certainty is free. The family pays the real price. The search begins at dawn. A line of investigators moves methodically, boots sinking into damp earth, the smell of soil and stagnant water rising with each step. Florida mornings can look gentle for a moment, light spilling across grass, birds calling, but the gentleness never lasts. Heat builds fast, and sweat turns shirts into second skin. The work is slow, deliberate, almost reverent. Shovels bite. Dirt is sifted. Every scrap is examined. Every fragment is treated like it could carry the weight of 18 years. Hours pass with nothing. Then another hour. Then the kind of quiet that makes people swallow hard for no reason, because silence starts to sound like a verdict. A dog stops suddenly. Stiffens. Nose locked to a patch of earth. Handlers exchange a look that needs no translation. The world narrows. Investigators converge. The family, watching from far back, sees the shift in movement and feels it in their bones. No one waves. No one announces. But the posture changes. The energy tightens. Something has been flagged. They dig carefully, like surgeons. Inches at a time. Dirt scraped away. The smell changes slightly, damp, metallic, something sour that might be nothing but imagination and might be a warning. A small object emerges first, coated in mud. Then another. Cloth? Plastic? It's hard to tell. Everyone leans in. Someone photographs. Someone calls for a different tool. Everything becomes procedure because procedure is the only way to stay upright in the face of what might be coming. And then the excavation stops. Not because they found the answer, but because they found a question too complicated to handle with shovels alone. A specialist is called. A forensic anthropologist. A crime scene tech with more patience than most human beings can manufacture. The family stands in the distance, hands clasped, knuckles white, watching the professionals move like they are carrying glass. The object is removed. Bagged. Labeled. Another item of interest. Another phrase that refuses to let anyone breathe. The family wants to scream, to demand clarity, to ask the one question they've been asking since 2007 in 1,000 different forms: is she here? But law enforcement doesn't deal in certainty until the lab deals in certainty, and the lab doesn't care about how long someone has waited. Night falls with no official confirmation. The search perimeter remains guarded. Floodlights hum. Bugs swarm. The place looks like a film set, but it isn't. It's real. It's messy. It's slow. And it is dragging the past out of the ground one careful inch at a time. While the search continues, another pressure builds in a different direction: legal pressure. Because new evidence, even potential evidence, collides with the case's fragile finality. If there was a conviction, defense attorneys move fast, demanding access, demanding independent testing, arguing chain of custody, arguing contamination, arguing that the state is shaping evidence to fit a story already decided. If there was an acquittal, the family hears the word double jeopardy whispered again, hears the bitter truth that even if the ground gives up its secrets now, the courtroom might never be allowed to speak them again. Detectives stand between these forces like a dam holding back floodwater. They want answers too. They want to find her, not for headlines, not for closure narratives, but for the simple human need to end uncertainty with something solid. They have seen what unanswered cases do to families. They've seen what they do to themselves. A cold case is not just a file. It is a slow infection. Then, in the middle of all this, a new voice enters, the kind that always arrives when fear and opportunity collide. A jailhouse informant. A man with nothing to lose and something to trade. He claims he heard something. He claims the suspect talked. Claimed things in the dark, in a cell, late at night when bravado and guilt mix into confession-like noise. The informant offers details that sound too specific to be invented and too convenient to be trusted. Detectives have heard this song before. They know informants lie like they breathe. But they also know sometimes, someone tells the truth for the wrong reasons. They interview him anyway. They document every word. They compare his story to what they know, to what the ground is giving up, to what the case file holds like a sealed vault. One detail matches something not public. Something never reported. Something only investigators and the perpetrator would know. The room tightens. Pens move faster. Eyes lock. The line between possible and credible blurs. Suddenly, the case feels unstable again. Not closed. Not decided. Not settled into its uneasy afterlife. It feels active, volatile, hungry. A cold case that has been reopened once is now reopening itself all over again, cracking wider, daring everyone to step closer. The family is told the search will expand. New areas. New warrants. New ground to disturb. They nod, swallowing the panic that rises like bile. Because expanded search means hope, but it also means the nightmare is growing, spreading into more places, more possibilities. On the final day of the first search phase, a storm rolls in, Florida's familiar violence, thunder cracking like gunshots, rain slamming down hard enough to erase footprints instantly. Work pauses. Tarps are thrown over excavation sites. Evidence is rushed into vehicles. The sky turns the color of bruises. And in that storm, with the scene suddenly chaotic, detectives look at each other with the same unspoken fear. What if time isn't the only enemy? What if the truth has been sitting here all along, and they're only now learning how easily it can be destroyed? The family sits at home listening to rain hit the roof in relentless sheets, watching news anchors repeat the same vague lines, feeling their phones vibrate with updates that never contain the one sentence they're desperate to hear. They realize something sharp and terrifying in that moment. This case has always moved like Florida weather. Quiet, then violent. Still, then sudden. And just when you think you understand its pattern, it changes direction and hits you again. Somewhere out there, under mud and water and years of silence, the ground is holding its breath. And the people who have waited since 2007 are holding theirs with it, because whatever comes next will not simply be information. It will be impact. It will be irreversible. It will be the kind of answer that doesn't heal. You don't heal from a cold case. You absorb it. You carry it. And if the Earth finally gives up what it took, the shock won't be in the discovery alone. The shock will be in what that discovery forces everyone to admit: that the case never really ended, that the arrest was only one chapter, that the truth has been moving under the surface this whole time, patient, silent, and ready to tear open the present the moment someone digs in the right place. The storm doesn't just interrupt the search, it stains it, soaking the ground until every footprint becomes a smear, until every boundary line feels temporary, until the Earth looks like it's trying to swallow its own secrets again. Florida rain hits with that blunt, violent insistence, hammering tarps, turning ditches into rivers, making floodlights flicker like they're second-guessing their own purpose. Investigators retreat to vehicles and mobile command tents, radios crackling, voices clipped, all of them aware of the same brutal truth: weather doesn't care about justice, and time doesn't pause because people are finally paying attention. In the hours that follow, the site is locked down hard. Armed guards. Patrol cars. Temporary fencing. The perimeter becomes a fortress, not to keep criminals out, but to keep meaning in. Because meaning is fragile. A careless step. A washed-out marker. A contaminated sample. One mistake, and 18 years of patience can collapse into a defense attorney's smile. Inside the evidence trailer, everything smells like wet fabric and antiseptic wipes. Bags are stacked on tables like silent accusations, each one tagged, sealed, initialed, time-stamped. The language of procedure is everywhere because procedure is the only thing standing between grief and chaos. A technician holds a muddy object under bright light, turning it with gloved fingers, looking for edges, for logos, for anything that can connect it to a human life. The object refuses to cooperate. Mud makes everything anonymous. Outside, the family is told nothing concrete. Again. They are told the same careful phrases, delivered by the same careful mouths. We are processing. We are waiting on the lab. We'll update you as soon as we can. Those sentences feel like an old soundtrack, familiar enough to make them nauseous. The family has heard them in 2007. They have heard them at every false alarm since. They hear them now and feel the same dread, that the truth is close, but not close enough to touch. The rain stops as suddenly as it began, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean in the worst possible way. The next morning the air is thick with steam rising from asphalt, and the search resumes with a kind of grim urgency, as if everyone understands the ground has already tried to erase itself once and might try again. Drones buzz over the site, mapping terrain that looks deceptively ordinary. The grid expands. New flags appear like tiny warnings planted in the soil. More dogs are brought in. More radar sweeps. The operation starts to feel less like a search and more like a slow, methodical excavation of the past. And then the call comes from the lab, not the final call, not the one with a full report, but the kind that makes people stand up straighter without meaning to. Preliminary results. A swab from the first recovered item shows biological material consistent with human origin. Not animal. Not random. Human. That single word pulls the air out of the room. The technician on the phone keeps talking, but everyone hears only that. Human means possibility. It means direction. It means the story might finally move from speculation to substance. The family receives the update in fragments, filtered through caution. They are told there are indications the item may be associated with the victim. May. Associated. The words are both gift and poison. They cling to them anyway. Their minds leap forward uncontrollably, picturing remains, picturing confirmation, picturing the end of not knowing. Then fear yanks them back. What if it's someone else? What if the earth is handing them a different tragedy? What if the case is about to fracture into something even more unbearable? Detectives move fast now, not with panic, but with momentum. If there is human material, the stakes change. The search becomes forensic. The site becomes sacred ground in the ugliest sense. A forensic anthropologist arrives with a face that has seen too much, eyes trained to spot the difference between debris and bone, between trash and evidence. They crouch by the flagged area, scanning soil with a patience that feels almost inhuman. Their hands move gently, like they're handling something that could shatter with a wrong breath. A small fragment surfaces first. Pale, curved, not immediately recognizable until the anthropologist's posture shifts. The room, if you can call an outdoor search grid a room, tightens. A silence falls that feels engineered, as if everyone has been trained to shut their mouths at the same time. The fragment is bagged. Photographed. Logged. Another fragment emerges. Then another. The pattern begins forming, and no one says what everyone is thinking, because saying it would make it real too soon. The family is kept back, again, behind tape and distance and the cruel logic of protocol. They watch workers move with that careful choreography that only happens when the ground stops being ground and becomes testimony. They see a tech wipe sweat off their brow with the back of a gloved wrist. They see an investigator swallow hard for no reason. They see the way professionals avoid looking at each other when something awful starts to clarify. By midday, the phrase changes. It is no longer items of interest. It becomes possible human remains. That possible hangs on like a fragile shield, but it doesn't protect anyone. It only delays impact. The media explodes. Helicopters circle. Live shots go up. Commentators talk over each other, trying to sound knowledgeable while knowing nothing. The public hears remains and thinks closure. The family hears remains and thinks about how long the earth has held her, how many seasons passed over her like nothing. They think about insects, water, heat. They think about what time does to a body and what it does to hope. They think about whether they're ready to see an evidence bag that contains more truth than they've been allowed to hold in 18 years. Inside the investigation, another clock starts ticking, legal strategy. Because if remains are confirmed, everything shifts again. If there was a conviction, the state's case hardens, the narrative becomes stronger, the argument becomes less inferential. If there was an acquittal, the discovery becomes a tormenting irony, proof arriving too late to be used in the way everyone wants. The family hears whispers of legal limitations, hears words like finality, double jeopardy, admissibility, and they realize something sickening. Even when the ground gives up the truth, the courtroom may still refuse to speak it. Defense attorneys move immediately. They demand access. They demand independent testing. They demand chain of custody documentation down to the second. They argue contamination risk from the storm, from construction activity, from the very act of reopening a site that has been disturbed by time. They file motions with the speed of people who understand that narrative is already forming in public and they need to cut holes in it before it solidifies. Prosecutors respond with their own urgency. They document everything. They bring in additional oversight. They make sure every glove change is recorded, every bag seal photographed, every evidence transfer witnessed. In a cold case, the defense's sharpest weapon is not innocence. It's doubt about handling. Doubt about procedure. Doubt about time. The anthropologist's work continues across days, and each day peels back another layer of the past. The remains, such as they are scattered, incomplete, altered by nature and human development. It is not a clean discovery. It is not a body laid out like a crime drama. It is fragments in earth that has been moved, soaked, compacted. The reality is uglier than anyone's imagination, and the ugliness does not answer questions. It only confirms that something ended here. The family is called in to provide reference samples for comparison. Some have done this before, years ago, when hope was raw and the case still warm. Others never did, unable to bear the idea of being part of a process that might confirm death. Now they do it because they need certainty more than they fear it. A swab. A signature. A small piece of their biology handed to the system like a key. Then comes the wait again. The lab is slow, because accuracy matters more than speed and because errors in cold cases are fatal in court. The family waits in that suspended state where they cannot grieve fully because confirmation hasn't arrived, and cannot hope fully because the direction of truth feels inevitable. Every phone vibration becomes a jolt. Every unknown number becomes a threat. At night, detectives sit in offices under buzzing lights, staring at maps and photos and the thin line between possibility and proof. They replay the suspect's old statements, the timeline, the overlaps. They wonder how close the suspect came to being caught earlier. They wonder if the suspect will crack now, if the pressure of physical confirmation will turn silence into confession. They also wonder if silence will harden instead, if the suspect will retreat deeper into legal defense and never offer the family the one thing they crave more than punishment: explanation. The suspect is brought back into court for a status hearing. The courtroom is smaller than the media makes it look, more claustrophobic, more human. The family sits behind the prosecution, eyes fixed on the back of the defendant's head. They listen as lawyers talk about new developments in the bloodless language of procedure. The defendant does not look back. The defendant does not react when possible human remains are mentioned. Or if they do react, it is microscopic, a blink too slow, a jaw muscle tightening. The family tries to read meaning into it, because that's what humans do when truth is withheld. The judge reminds everyone to be respectful, to let the science speak. Outside, the community holds its breath again, a breath it didn't realize it still had been holding since 2007. People argue in parking lots, at diner counters, in online comment sections. Some believe the discovery proves everything. Others insist it proves nothing until identification is confirmed. A few whisper conspiracy, accuse law enforcement of manufacturing evidence, accuse the defense of obstructing, accuse the family of bias. The case becomes a mirror for everyone's beliefs about justice, and the victim's humanity gets lost in the reflection. Then the call finally comes. The one everyone dreaded and needed. The voice on the line is quiet, formal, almost gentle in its restraint. The remains have been identified. The comparison is strong. The probability is overwhelming. The name is spoken not as a headline, not as a case file label, but as a person. And the family collapses in the way people collapse when something they have been bracing for arrives at last, not dramatic, not performative, just a sudden surrender of muscles and breath, the body giving up the fight it didn't realize it was still maintaining. There is no relief in this confirmation. There is only weight. Because now the questions sharpen instead of soften. Where exactly was she? How did she end up there? Was she moved? Was she left? Was she hidden? Was this site chosen for convenience or because it meant something to someone who wanted her erased? The Earth has given up her identity, but it has not given up her story. Not yet. Detectives promise to continue. To search for more. To determine cause, if possible. To look for trauma indicators. To see whether the remains can speak in the limited language bones still have after time has taken so much. They explain that results may be inconclusive, that nature has changed things, that certainty about cause and manner may be impossible. The family hears this and feels rage rise, because even now, even with her name confirmed in the dirt, the case is still trying to deny them answers. And in the middle of that rage, another realization hits with brutal clarity: this discovery doesn't end the cold case. It transforms it. It turns a missing person into a recovered victim, turns absence into proof, turns speculation into physical reality. It also turns the story into something that cannot be reversed. Because now, whether the law can move or not, whether appeals succeed or fail, whether jurors were right or wrong, one fact stands heavier than any argument: she was there. She was in that ground. The silence was not empty. It was occupied. The family drives past the search site days later, not allowed inside, only close enough to see the flags and tape and the churned soil under the Florida sun. They sit in a parked car, staring at earth that looks like every other patch of Florida dirt, and they feel something cold run through them. It isn't fear anymore. It's comprehension. That the story they've lived for 18 years has been under that surface, waiting. And as the investigation turns toward what comes next, toward reconstructing the final hours, toward connecting remains to intent, toward deciding what this means legally and morally, the atmosphere thickens again. Because the case has crossed a threshold. It has moved from did she die to how, and who, and why, and that shift is not comfort. It is ignition. Somewhere, behind legal motions and media frenzy, behind forensic protocols and careful statements, a truth is tightening like a fist. And everyone involved can feel it, that dangerous sense that the case is about to deliver something sharper than closure. Not peace. Impact. And whatever impact is coming will not just shock a family. It will shock the entire narrative, because once the earth confirms what it was hiding, the next question is unavoidable, relentless, and unbearable in its simplicity. If she was there, who put her there? The moment the earth gives her back, the entire case changes temperature, not warming, not soothing, but turning volatile, like a sealed room suddenly filled with oxygen again. Identification is not closure. Identification is ignition. It transforms the story from missing to found, from abstract absence to physical fact, and that fact is heavy enough to bend everything around it: legal strategy, public belief, the family's grief, even the suspect's silence. Because now there is no arguing with the ground. The question isn't whether something happened. The question is who, and how, and why the truth had to wait this long to surface. In the days after confirmation, the family is invited into a different kind of room, a room with fewer cameras and more paperwork, where grief is handled like a sensitive substance. Victim advocates speak softly. Detectives speak precisely. A medical examiner explains the limits of what remains can reveal after years in Florida soil, where heat and moisture accelerate decay, where insects and water arrays detail with ruthless efficiency. The words are clinical, but the message is brutal. Some answers may never arrive intact. Cause of death might be undetermined. Manner might be inferred but not proven. Trauma might be visible, or it might have been swallowed by time. The family listens, nodding, not because they accept it, but because their bodies have learned how to absorb disappointment without collapsing completely. They have lived inside might and maybe since 2007. But now, with confirmation on paper, might feels like an insult. Now, uncertainty feels like theft. Because the earth finally spoke, and it still didn't say everything. A funeral is discussed in terms of logistics, dates, remains handling, what can be returned, what must remain in evidence custody. Even mourning is procedural now. The family wants ceremony, wants a place to put their hands, wants a marker that says she existed beyond headlines. But the case isn't finished, and the system doesn't release what it still needs. Their loved one becomes both family and evidence, both person and exhibit, caught between dignity and process. Outside, the public reacts with predictable violence. Headlines harden overnight. Remains found in Florida cold case. Victim identified after 18 years. Investigation reignites. Commentators speak in dramatic tones, as if death discovered late is somehow less heavy. Online, strangers celebrate prematurely, declaring justice inevitable, declaring the suspect doomed, declaring the story solved at last. But investigators don't celebrate. They understand something the public rarely does: confirmation is only one piece of proof. It doesn't automatically attach itself to a perpetrator in a way that survives court. Detectives return to the site again and again, expanding the search outward like ripples. The discovery of remains implies more: clothing fragments, personal items, a possible weapon, evidence of transport, evidence of concealment. They look for anything that can transform a narrative into a chain, link after link after link, strong enough to hold up under the crushing weight of cross-examination. They sift soil like they're sifting time itself, hoping the past left behind something it couldn't fully erase. The forensic anthropologist maps the remains' distribution, reading the pattern like a language. Scattered suggests disturbance. Clustered suggests placement. Depth suggests timing. Soil compaction suggests whether the ground has been moved. These interpretations are not dramatic. They are cautious. But even caution carries implications. If the remains were buried intentionally, that speaks to intent. If they were dumped, that speaks to haste. If they were moved, that speaks to fear. Every inference is dangerous. Every inference is a target. Defense attorneys already circle those targets. They file motions demanding full disclosure, chain of custody logs, lab protocols, weather impact assessments from the storm, construction records showing how the land was disturbed. They argue the site was compromised by development, that fragments could have been relocated by machinery, that identification, while emotionally powerful, does not prove the defendant's involvement. They weaponize time, because time is always the defense's quiet ally in cold cases. Prosecutors respond by tightening everything. They bring in additional experts. They prepare demonstratives, maps, timelines, diagrams that will allow jurors to see what the earth revealed and why it matters. They frame the discovery not as a convenient twist, but as validation of a trajectory. The case was reopened because evidence pointed toward the suspect, and now the physical truth has surfaced in a way that aligns with that evidence. They will argue the earth did not contradict them. It confirmed the story's core: she did not vanish into nothing. She was taken. Then the suspect's attorney requests a new hearing. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Procedural. But everyone knows what it means: pressure is shifting. Either the defense wants to get ahead of public sentiment, or the prosecution wants to leverage the remains discovery into a stronger posture. The courtroom fills again, and it feels different now. The air is heavier. The family sits with a new kind of pain, pain with a location, pain with evidence, pain that is no longer hypothetical. The judge listens as experts speak about identification probabilities, DNA profiles, mitochondrial markers, statistical confidence. The words are dense, but the meaning is simple: it is her. The defense doesn't dispute identification outright. They can't. So they pivot. They concede the tragic fact while denying the link. They say, in effect, yes, she is dead. No, that does not mean you have the right person. And that is when the case reaches its final emotional cliff. Because for the family, the last barrier of denial has fallen. Their loved one is gone, confirmed. Now the system is threatening to deliver the second blow, that even with her found, accountability might still slip away through legal seams. The family feels rage flare, not at any one person, but at the structure of reality itself: how unfair it is that truth can arrive and still not be enough. Detectives, meanwhile, follow a new thread that becomes impossible to ignore. It comes from the same place cold cases often break open: a conscience that finally cracks under time. Someone calls in. Not anonymous. Not a prank. A person with a voice that shakes in the way people shake when they're about to ruin their own lives with honesty. They say they knew the suspect back then. They say they heard something years ago, an offhand comment, a drunken confession, a threat framed like a joke. They say they didn't come forward because they were scared, because the suspect was the kind of person you didn't cross, because they convinced themselves it was nothing. They say they have carried it like poison ever since. Investigators listen, and they do not interrupt. They know the difference between performance and confession. They ask for specifics. They ask for dates, phrases, locations. The caller provides one detail that makes the room go still, a description of an item that was recovered at the site but not released publicly. Something small. Something personal. Something that only someone involved, or someone told by someone involved, would know. The statement is recorded. Documented. Corroborated. Detectives cross-check timelines, phone logs, travel patterns. The witness is not perfect. No witness ever is after 18 years. But imperfection doesn't negate credibility. It complicates it. And complication is what cold cases are built from. With this new statement, prosecutors feel the case tightening. A physical anchor exists now. A credible witness suggests prior knowledge. The suspect's old interviews are re-examined line by line. One denial sounds too broad. One explanation sounds rehearsed. A detail about where the suspect was that night conflicts subtly with a newly reconstructed timeline. A crack forms. Then another. Detectives return to the suspect's old property records. An address history. A storage unit rented in 2007. A vehicle registered that year, later sold. They dig into financial records and find a gap, money withdrawn in a pattern that aligns with travel and secrecy. On its own, it's nothing. In a mosaic, it becomes something else. They locate an old acquaintance of the suspect, someone who avoided interviews back then, someone who always had an excuse. This person sits in an interrogation room now, older, thinner, eyes darting like they're still afraid of the same shadow. Investigators lay out facts. They show the search site. They show the recovered items. They mention the witness call. They let silence do what shouting never can. The acquaintance breaks. Not with tears. With exhaustion. They admit the suspect asked for help that year, help moving something heavy late at night, help cleaning a vehicle, help dumping bags. They claim they didn't know what it was. They claim they suspected. They claim they lied to themselves. Their voice cracks only once, when they say the words no one wants to say, I think it was her. That statement hits the case like a hammer. It is not physical evidence, but it is connective tissue. It bridges the gap between remains and perpetrator. It gives prosecutors something jurors understand, a human voice linking actions to consequence. Defense attorneys attack instantly. They call the acquaintance unreliable, self-serving, motivated by deals or fear. They highlight inconsistencies. They paint the statement as a late-in-life invention shaped by media coverage. Prosecutors counter with corroboration, details matching evidence not public, a timeline that aligns, records that support the account. The fight becomes brutal, technical, relentless. And somewhere beneath that fight, the family watches, realizing something painful and profound. The truth is not a single moment. It is a battle. It is a pile of fragments stacked carefully until they resemble something solid. And even then, it can be knocked down by doubt. As the case reaches this new peak, the suspect's composure finally changes. Not dramatically. Not visibly to the public. But in a private moment, captured in a hallway camera, the suspect pauses too long at a doorway, shoulders tightening, face flickering with something like calculation, or fear. The defense insists it means nothing. The prosecution insists it means everything. The family sees it and feels their stomach twist, because for them, meaning has always lived in small shifts. A new hearing is scheduled. The state announces additional charges, or enhanced charges, tied to the recovered remains and new witness testimony. The legal machine roars again, louder than before. The media returns, hungry. The community leans in. The story that was supposed to be ending is now accelerating toward a final confrontation that promises to be uglier and more definitive. But then, in the quiet between hearings, the family receives something they never expected, a message passed through attorneys, delivered with cold precision. The suspect is considering a statement. Not a full confession. Not a plea. A statement. It is offered like a bargaining chip. A partial truth in exchange for something: leniency, protection, control. The family hears this and feels rage surge so hard it burns. Even now, even with her found, the suspect is trying to control the narrative. Trying to hold the last piece of the puzzle hostage. Detectives and prosecutors debate strategy under fluorescent lights. Do they offer a deal to recover missing information? Do they risk weakening punishment to gain location details, cause details, final moments details? Families in these cases are often told they can weigh in, but the system ultimately chooses what it values: certainty of conviction or completeness of truth. The family sits with that choice like it's a weapon pointed inward. They want everything. They want justice and answers. They want the full story and the full penalty. They realize they may have to choose one. And that is the final cruel twist of cold cases. Even when the earth gives up the body, even when the system gives up an arrest, even when witnesses finally speak, the family is still asked to compromise with reality. They are still asked to accept less than what was taken. In the end, the case leaves a final image that doesn't feel like closure but like a scar burned into the community's memory. A stretch of Florida dirt under harsh sun, flags fluttering in a faint breeze, a place that looks ordinary unless you know what it held. Beneath that ordinariness sits the undeniable truth that her disappearance was never a mystery of vanishing. It was a human act. A choice. A decision made in the dark that shaped 18 years of suffering. And whether the suspect confesses or stays silent forever, whether the courts deliver their final word or legal limits choke it off, the echo remains in the family and the community like an unhealed wound. Because the most haunting part of a cold case isn't the moment it goes cold. It's the moment it warms again, just enough to remind everyone that the past is still there, still alive beneath the surface, and still capable of shocking you with how much damage it can do when it finally, brutally, speaks.